Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in support of this appropriations bill before us today because, as we all know, it takes cash to care. And when you have few pennies, you must spend them wisely, especially when we are painstakingly sacrificing to ebb our way out of debt. We must balance spending our monies wisely with managing the affairs of our people and giving due diligence to the necessary priorities and smart ways of spending such pennies. Mr. President, when it comes to health care, it is indeed good to plant seeds for the betterment of our people as we seek to enable the health of our people by providing for them avenues for peace, opportunity, and prosperity. As outlined in his presentation, Mr. Prime Minister, our Prime Minister reflected on those seeds, and my colleague Senator reflected on them earlier today, being security, energy and environment, education and skills, development of infrastructure, and social partnership and unity. Mr. President, not because I have a bias to mental health care, but I think we can all rationalize that when we consider the health of someone and our own health and those of who we serve, our mental health is most paramount. If for the fact that one can be physically fit as a fiddle, but if you ain't right upstairs, you're not right at all. And might I reflect on the many who are not physically well, but are mentally thriving. And so, Mr. President, as we seek to address adequately the mental health needs of our people, we must think holistically on these seeds, Mr. President, which indeed will bear fruit in the positive mindset of our people. But let me zoom in on the aspects that are overtly recognized as health, namely the physical, the mental, the social, and the spiritual. We must never forget the great significance of our spiritual health, Mr. President, and I will get into that. But let us reflect on what is on everybody's mind, that we are now emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, permit me to start by recognizing my colleagues in the health sector, from the porters to the medical consultants, from the nursing aides to the matrons, to the lab technicians, to the medical equipment engineers, the dozens of ancillary staff that fought in many ways in this fight in our Jamaican hospitals, and most definitely, especially to those direct practitioners in the emergency room, the nurses and the doctors at the vaccination sites, the drivers, of course, and indeed our Minister of Health and his team. We must say thank you for going above and beyond in this effort to lessen the damage of this pandemic on the lives of Jamaicans. Mr. President, I'm heartened to see that there are plans afoot of making a special category of service awards developed for Jamaica 60 to honor our hard-working frontline workers. Mr. President, the Prime Minister, before removing the padlocks and flying the gate, said in his presentation, our citizens know what to do to protect themselves and their families. And this may be true for a lot, but permit me to remind us. Maintain a healthy diet that consists of immune-boosting agents. Don't just chop bush and go and drink it. Research and ask questions of people who might know. Of course, maintain good exercise. Maintain exposure to sunlight. Access the vaccine at any of the many sites now available if that is your choice. Maintain a positive and proactive outlook. Mr. President, I must simply, because it does take cash to care, put in the context of the management of this COVID pandemic, recognize the tremendous effort of our Minister of Finance, the Honorable Nigel Clark, for his erudite management of our economy, that my colleague, Senator Webby, clearly demonstrated. And to suffice to say that that is the significant mechanism by which we have weathered this storm. Despite the fallout in revenues as a result of the pandemic, $26.4 billion so far has been spent on the COVID-19 response. An additional response targeting the most vulnerable in our society, giving back over $40.6 billion to this point. Mr. President, this is the most any government has ever given back in care support in Jamaica's history. But you know, Mr. President, this is the piece of rock that we call Jamaica. We look about with Talawa in many ways. Some are still not yet to fathom how much actually. We see where our death rates liken to the countries that have higher vaccination rates. We see our economy growing when others have declined. It speaks to the resilience of our people and our habits. Our land gives us fresh seasonal fruits and we have brilliant sunshine. Let us not take these for granted as we go through these reopened gates. Remember that the pandemic is not over. Still take your precautions, especially if you are in the high-risk comorbid group. Recall that regulations issued under the Public Health Act do still require persons who test positive to isolate, labs to protect the privacy and identity of persons who test positive for COVID, hand wash and sanitize. Just recognize, look around you. You're not seeing as much kids with runny noses and flu symptoms. It's not just about the COVID-19 pandemic. Hygiene goes a far way. Mask wearing in enclosed spaces to which we have public access, for example, supermarkets, banks, public transport, collectorate of taxes. Remember now, masks are not mandatory, but they are recommended, especially in contained and accompanied spaces. Maintain physical distance, not social distance. And of course, make sure that you are listening to the updates because there are variants that are coming across as we speak. Now, Mr. President, I cannot address the pandemic and not envision the next crisis that we may have to be dealing with, if we're not yet dealing with it. For it may now be an epidemic here in Jamaica. And that, of course, is the impact on our mental health and that of our people. Truth be told, colleagues, we in the field of this care saw it coming. And we were apprehensive as we knew we were woefully inadequate for decades before and saw with concerned minds what was to come. And Senator Fraser-Binns, yes, especially our children, who are arrested in their natural stages of development. Our people had to grapple with the possibilities of serious death and illness. Babies now, 2 years old, don't know a face without a mask. That's a reality.
That's true.
Elderlies who have been isolated and vulnerable are dealing with depression, worsening cases of cognitive decline, increases in domestic violence and child abuse, arrested education. And what was so very daunting is that there was no end in sight. It was tough times, and it is still for many. Mr. President, we are seeing a fallout of this effect in our emergency rooms that are being overwhelmed by psychiatric referrals. We're seeing it being played out in our schools and our children. Senator Fraser-Binns made some reference to some of the violence, but I'll go into that later on. But yes, there was response too to some of these issues by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Suicide helplines were established. Domestic violence helplines were established by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports. We recently had an increase in the number of mental health care providers in the forensic services. 10 new posts created to address some of the ills there. Very significant improvements in our mental health care delivery. But Mr. President, in addressing this, I had to also refer to my colleagues. I wear the cap of being president of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. And we saw what was happening. and we felt a duty to respond. And I want to thank the members of the JPA who contributed to gathering our thoughts together to say, what can we suggest would be the approach that is needed to address some of these challenges that our families face. And Mr. President, let me relate this back to the dollars and the cents that we are here discussing. The scourge on Jamaican society right now is crime and violence. And everyone is clamoring and trying to figure out, how do we stem what is stifling Jamaica from accomplishing our significant potential? Mr. President, our issues of crime and violence are not new. We are basically seeing the culmination of generations of trauma. Our families are now trying to figure out how to be functional when we're coming from situations where fathers, males were made to be likened to livestock, to breed and detach from their young, to not maintain contact. Women were basically told that they need to compete for the eye of the favored male so that they can breed good stock. These issues continue through the generations, Mr. President. And at the end of the day, we are now trying to grapple with coming to full stream in a modern society that is supposed to have significant family values and ties. But that does not happen over. Yep, yeah, thank you. Like everything else, we roll with the punches. Yes, Mr. President, so the generational effect on our families, we're seeing a culmination of this. And I don't want to stand here and trying to say who, what. The fact is that we are in a dire situation, and some of our most vulnerable parts of our population is at risk. Kenneth Williams, the only child for his parents, who are to be married this Saturday, was gunned down in Ligani earlier this week, coming from school in his school uniform, going to school. Thank you. In Trelawney, Kamal Roach, his mother, Natasha Roach, is in pain right now. His death is related to the fight over a guard ring. You know, last night while preparing this, a friend of mine from Germany sent me a video involving, asking me, Saf, can you do something about this? A very explicit video of school children engaged in a sexual act that it turned my stomach within our schools. And I had to contact Diana Gordon-Harris of the OCA, who acted upon it. But Mr. President, we cannot seek to be spending our monies and seek to be dealing with crime and violence without dealing with the issues around our children and channeling the resources, the adverse childhood experiences, the trauma, the abuse. We are grappling with the fact that these to substance use, and to non-communicable diseases. If we fix it at the base, if we practice preventative medicine, if we channel some of the billions that are being spent in security, or recognize that a significant aspect of securing our country is preventing and helping our vulnerable population, Mr. President, it could go a very far way. We have been dealing with this for decades, and we could be the administration that stems the cycle. Mr. President, our children are our seeds. We in government liken to the parents of our population. And what is the single most important role of a good parent, Mr. President? Is it not to equip our children to survive as best they can, with particular care to the youngest and our most vulnerable? Mr. President, our seeds must be nurtured. They live what they learn, and they learn what they live. Some of the recommendations by my colleagues in the JPA are as follows. Early intervention and preventative mental health programs to reprioritize our early childhood mental health. Support for parenting and families via the Reach Up program that is currently within the ministry. Expand it. We have the Dream a World program, which is a cultural program that seeks to enable. We had the Poet Laureate, and I remember Senator Scott Motley, you mentioned how good it would be to see this in our schools. Yes, that is a part of the Dream a World program, where we use culture to fix some of the social ills. Other initiatives focused on planned parenting, enabling our families to learn how to discipline their children, how to resolve conflict. We have the program that Senator Professor Stan Kuchel came a couple of years ago and basically saw and laid out a platform for the emotional health and well-being of our students. Mr. President, I spoke in my last State of the Nation presentation on the importance of sexual health education. For too long, sexual health has been a taboo subject matter. We need to stop putting it under the rug and allow children good guidance